Welcome back to the Metro on 1019 WDET-FM. I'm Tia Graham. The summer of 2020 was a unique time in America. Many were staying at home, trying to slow the spread of COVID-19. The Trump administration's popularity was waning, and there was a surge of interest in the ways that racism was hurting people's health, their politics, and their minds. Pew Surveys reports that in June of 2020, support for the Black Lives Matter movement hit 67%. It was then that people were more interested in becoming anti-racist. But 5 years later, Americans are a lot less concerned with the ways that racism impacts themselves and others. The Trump administration is now back in power, and diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are in retreat. The Black Lives Matter painted street that we've all seen in Washington, D.C. has been removed. But why did this happen? And what would cause Americans to regain an interest in fighting racism? To discuss all this, we have Dr. Ibram X. Kendi here. He's the New York Times bestselling author of Stamped from the Beginning and How to Be Antiracist. He has a new children's book out about Malcolm X, and he will be in Detroit tomorrow afternoon for a press conference and rally to stop tax foreclosures of Detroit homes under $50,000 in value. Dr. Kendi, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, Dr. Kendi, 2025 is a very different time than 2020. Americans' commitment to face their prejudices, changes all the time. During the late 1800s, the post-Civil War Reconstruction era was a time frame that would expand equality, but that got rolled back when America entered a period of Jim Crow. This happens again and again throughout American history. Why do you think Americans seem to care less about confronting their prejudice and creating a more equal society today than they did a few years ago?
So, because in many ways Americans are manipulated and misled into believing that those of us who are seeking to bring about more racial justice and equity for all are actually trying to harm people or harm America. And so that sort of narrative that somehow anti-racist work is anti-American or harmful to America or even anti-white was actually the narrative that undermined the Reconstruction era. It undermined the interracial civil rights movement, and you see that it's undermined our efforts in the last, 5 years.
And Dr. Kendi, I often think about just during the Reconstruction era and the amount of Black Americans who were actually within politics and held positions in politics. And I just think to myself how we saw it roll back there. What happens to America to make America's commitment to equality and anti-racism? Like, what needs to happen to prevent backlashes to efforts that reckon with racism?
Well, I think first and foremost, we just have to understand that whenever we are able to make some sort of progress, so you mentioned the Reconstruction era, you had many Black politicians who were formerly enslaved who got into positions of power and started doing things that benefited all Southerners, like introduced free public schooling, which benefited not only Black Southerners, but white Southerners who didn't have access to public schools, and a whole host of other sort of projects that benefited the vast majority of people. And instead of many people realizing that, these Black politicians were framed as, again, seeking to harm the very white people that they were actually helping. And again, that's happened this time. And so I think it's important for people to not be so easily misled, but part of it is when you don't know history, when you aren't taught history, when you don't see how actually equity work is benefiting you, then it's easy to be manipulated in that way.
And I learned a lot from the PBS documentary with Dr. Henry Louis Gates there on PBS talking about Reconstruction. And that was one of the things that struck me as odd, that we didn't know as much as we know now about Black politicians during Reconstruction. But I do want to build on that. And how is equity work benefiting everyone, including people who aren't Black or brown?
Well, again, if let's say, for instance, you are a white rural American, or you're a white woman, or you're a white working class or white low-income American, or you're a white person with disabilities, or you're even, the chances are that those diversity, equity, inclusion programs weren't just necessarily seeking to protect Black people or Latinos or Asians. They were seeking to protect you, to make sure that sexism or ableism or policies that privilege suburban and urban people, aren't inhibiting you. And so that's why it's been tragic to witness people advocate against policies that are actually allowing them to be more included, in some of the spaces that they had historically been excluded in.
Now, Dr. Kendi, I want to talk about anti-racism because it is such a large part of your work. For those who haven't read your work before, what is anti-racism? How do you define it?
So to be anti-racist is to recognize that there's nothing wrong or right or inferior or superior about any racial group, and the racial disparities and inequities we see in our society are not the result of the poor behavior, let's say, of Black people. They are the result of racist policies and practices that actually exclude, inhibit, deny opportunities for particular racial groups. So Black people aren't more likely to be incarcerated because they're more violent. They're more likely to be incarcerated because a series of practices and policies within our criminal legal system. And so to be anti-racist is to recognize and to challenge those policies as opposed to continuously victim blaming.
Mm. And what does it look like to do anti-racist work?
Well, it depends. It is to be in a community or even an institution and recognize that there are rules that govern that institution or that community. And to do anti-racist work is to make sure that those rules are equitable, to make sure those rules are just, to make sure that people are not being looked down upon because of the color of their skin in your institution, in your community, that we all have a fair shot, to have a joyful and beneficial livelihood.
Now, Dr. Kendi, you've written that when it comes to race, there is no such thing as not racist. That idea doesn't exist. Only one that does exist is racist or anti-racist, either one or the other. What do you mean by that?
Well, first, I think when you think about the term not racist, people commonly use that term when they say or do something that's racist. We call it out, and their response is, no, I'm not racist.
Yeah.
And they almost never define the construct of not racist because there is no definition. Mm-hmm. It really is just a term of denial, while to be a racist idea actually connotes racial hierarchy. What's the opposite of racial hierarchy? Racial equality, which is an anti-racist idea. If a racist policy is leading to inequity, what's the opposite of that? A policy that's anti-racist that's leading to equity. So I show in my work that the true opposite of racist is actually anti-racist.
Yeah, and a number of liberal scholars have criticized this binary, that ideas and policies can either be racist or anti-racist. They say that is a gray area. So, for example, environmental policy might clean up the environment but close down the factory, which may hurt the workers within that community who may be Black and brown. What do you say to that argument?
Well, typically, you have liberal scholars in particular who imagine themselves as not racist. But they typically express racist ideas or support racist policies. So for them, they don't want to remove the construct of not racist. They actually prefer the binary of racist and not racist. They actually call the binary of racist and anti-racist simplistic and a binary, even though they want to hold on to the binary that allows them to deny the ways in which they're being racist. And I talk about how a policy can be both, in certain types of ways, both racist and anti-racist, depending on the outcome. And so these aren't fixed concepts. And so typically people who critique the concepts apply their own concept that these are fixed notions, that they don't allow for nuance or complexity, and then they misrepresent them and critique them, as we often see, with disinformation today.
And I just want to build on the moment really quickly in talking about when we hear the term scream, a person scream out, "I'm not racist," or "I didn't mean to say that in a way that would be seen as racist." Can we talk about that for just a little bit and what it actually is saying when a person says that?
Well, I think it's important for us to understand that the heartbeat of being racist is denial. And the sound of that heartbeat is, "I'm not racist." And that's one of the reasons why I continuously urge people to recognize that the context, I should say, the construct of not racist is a term of a denial. And to be anti-racist, by contrast, is to actually acknowledge when we say something or do something that's racist and another person diagnoses that or describes that or points it out. To be anti-racist is to be like, you know what? That was racist. What I said was racist. I'm going to be better. I'm going to do better. I'm going to strive to be anti-racist.
I love the heartbeat of being racist is denial. That's just the heart of it. And I think a lot of folks would take that away and take that with them. And hopefully they take that away with them today. We're talking about DEI rollbacks, anti-racism, and a rally against tax foreclosure that's happening tomorrow at 3:15 at the Detroit Public Library's main branch. Our guest is Dr. Ibram X. Kendi, who will be in attendance tomorrow. And Dr. Kendi also has a new book out, Malcolm Lives. Now, Dr. Kendi, your new book, Malcolm Lives, is sharing the life of Malcolm X for young readers. I do want to say before we get into the book, so many young people are unaware of Malcolm X and his life and his times. What do you make of that?
I think that's, to me, less of an indictment on young people and more of an indictment on us. Us as parents, us as educators, us as who are trying to develop a system of education, and an indictment on the book banners, an indictment on those who are preventing us from educating our children about some of the most impactful and inspirational figures in American history, like Malcolm X.
And I'm assuming that's one of the reasons you decided to write the book, so you could be that person there who's starting to take a stand and saying, hey, here's the history of Malcolm X.
Exactly. I mean, Malcolm X was absolutely pivotal in the 1960s as somebody who was prosecuting American racism and encouraging Black people to realize there was nothing wrong with them and everything wrong with racism, as somebody who traveled around the world trying to bring Black people together, as somebody who advocated for the elevation of the civil rights struggle to a human rights global struggle. This is somebody who was also fearless and courageous and who are still inspiring people today with his ideas and with his messages, which is why he still lives.
And for young people, what kinds of lessons did you want to teach young people about the life of Malcolm X?
Well, I mean, in addition to what I just conveyed, I think for young people, when they read Malcolm Lives, they're going to learn that Malcolm X faced a number of different adversities as a young person, from his having to move multiple times throughout his life. Of course, he eventually arrived in Michigan,
yes,
but he was born in Omaha and then moved to Milwaukee and then finally lived in Michigan, to his father being killed in Lansing, to his family plunging into hunger and poverty, to his mother being taken away and put in an insane asylum, to his brothers and sisters being broken up. And I think it's important for young people to see those adversities and see a person who not only was able to overcome those adversities, but then also spend his life challenging the structures that led to those adversities. And so no matter what place young people are right now, no matter what they're facing, no matter who's counted them out, they could still become influential and transform the world like Malcolm X.
And, the story here in Michigan, Malcolm X lived in Inkster, Michigan for a while. And based on historians' records, this is where he really became Malcolm X as we know it. He started to really, really cement that here, which is an amazing thing to think about, especially when we talk about civil rights, the movement, and in the city of Detroit in this area. But I do want to turn to the event that you'll be at tomorrow. The Coalition for Property Tax Justice is convening a press conference and rally with you, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, and author Bernadette Atuahene. Why did you decide to join this rally?
Well, one of the ways in which racism operates is through bureaucracy, through people's property taxes being inflated and them having to essentially ultimately have their homes taken away from them. And so many Black people in Detroit has faced this over the years. And it's something that we need to call attention to. It's something that we need to challenge. And frankly, I'm going to be in town talking about Malcolm X, his family faced racist covenants. And this is a new way, right, to drive Black people out of homes that they owned. And I think it's something, all people in Detroit should be rallying against.
Dr. Ibram X. Kendi is the New York Times bestselling author of Stamped from the Beginning and How to Be an Antiracist. He has a new children's book out about Malcolm X. Dr. Kendi, thank you so much for joining us on The Metro.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Metro is hosted by Robin Vincent and Tia Graham. The show is produced by Sam Corey, Kerry Jr. II, and Jack Philbrand. Our senior producer is David Lyons. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Music and creative audio production by Sam Bobian. The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. This is 1019 WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.